Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sprint 124 review. Sprint ended on November 11th. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'll give a quick overview of the Sprint statistics. Harpreet will discuss the UI, Adam will do providers, Ina for automate, Joe on platform, Martin on API, and Mike will do QE. Next slide, please.
Actually, Dennis, I'm sorry. I don't think we have a mic. I don't think we have anything from QE this week.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So for the PR stats, the takeaway here is for the third sprint in a row, the number of open PRs is still going up, but the backlog is growing because the number of merge sprint are going down a little bit. So have to keep an eye on that so the backlog doesn't grow too large. We're kind of spiking a little bit. We'll see how that does next sprint. Next slide, please. And kind of like the last one, so here we have the case where the number of enhancements are growing over last sprint. The number of bug fixes closed has been decreasing for the past like 4 sprints. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I'll have to take a look at that and get back to everybody on that one. Next slide, please. And our overall health is pretty static. The biggest change is the number of other issues in the UI Classic, but overall it's pretty much unchanged. Next slide, please. And over to Harpreet.
Thanks, Dennis. Hello, everyone. Total of 42 PRs merged across UI repos. Out of that, there were 3 enhancements, 20 bug fixes, and so on. I have some of the main bug fixes listed here. A missing route was fixed in Catalog Explorer when trying to access Service Catalog's details screen. There were few PRs in Service UI, UI Components, and UI Classic repo to fix an issue with submit and refresh of date field in Dialog Runner. A fix was made in Optimization Reports list view to display last run at field format to be consistent with what we have in Reports Explorer list views. A nil error was fixed when trying to load a saved report that's still being generated because all the fields are only set when the report is done generating. So this change enables the component to load and show no records found instead of throwing an error. A fix was made on user edit screen to disable save button after canceling user's password changes. A bug was fixed to allow performing smart state analysis on data stores in data store clusters accordion. And left vertical navigation menu was rewritten in React. This was conversion of current logic into React. In future, show, hide, click, hover, and some other logics will be moved into React components. And for enhancements, we have a couple of enhancements in V2V area that I have screenshots for. So next slide, please. On the conversion hosts tab of the migration settings page, this PR adds text before each conversion host's status indicator to show that host's configured transformation method is either it's VDDK or if SSH. Next slide, please. List view table component support was added in this PR. As you can see on the plan details list view here. Now user can expand each row in the list to view its children and other details. And that's all I have for the UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So the main theme for this sprint was pluggability and moving things out of core that should be in providers. So on the first one, we removed a check for current snapshots before creating a new one. This was something that was done a long time ago in VMware to prevent making a bad situation worse, but it's really not needed in core and was preventing snapshots on other providers when they shouldn't have been. Oleg did a good amount of work to subclass EMS clusters. There was actually STI on this class, but only OpenStack was using it. So he went through, did the migration to properly subclass into all of the providers that support EMS clusters. This allowed us to move a lot of the provider-specific code, particularly VMware, out of the base EMS cluster class and into the provider repo. Oleg also subclassed require snapshot for scan, part of the pluggability and moving provider logic out of the core VM scan smart state code. So one of the things that we were checking explicitly for different provider types was to see if we should create a snapshot or not. So now there's a a method to check if a snapshot's needed to do a smart state scan, and it's implemented by those provider repos. A lot of plugins require a symlink to ManageIQ in their spec ManageIQ to run tests, but not all of them. Particularly, I think Gems Pending and Schema don't require this. There's no obvious way to know from the outside whether or not a plugin needs this link or not. So what we did was we added a way to pass an environment variable and let the plugin, as part of its bin setup, create that symlink if it needs it. So this makes running in cross-repo test context a lot easier. Before we were just creating that symlink, and that actually caused some failures for the plugins that didn't need it. So we moved that logic into the plugins where it should be. Next slide. On the Ansible Tower side, Julian fixed an issue that was the result of our cleaning up after moving embedded Ansible over to Ansible Runner. There used to be a bunch of mix-ins that were included into the different provider classes. The event parser was a module when it should have been a class, and so that was causing event parsing on Ansible Tower to fail, so he fixed that up. On Overt, a community user reported an interesting issue where if you changed both CPU and memory while a VM was running, Rev postpones that until the next time the VM reboots. Memory can apply immediately, but CPUs have to wait. It turns out then using the Rev API, if there's at least one operation that has to be applied on the next run, then all the operations have to have that next run property set. And so what was happening was the CPUs would be set, but the memory change would be dropped. So the Rev team fixed that up. And now that you can change both of those while the VM is running without a problem. For VMware, we added the ability to get content libraries through the automation API. However, if the automation API is unavailable, we're raising an exception that was causing the refresh to fail. So now when we try to get that, we catch that specific exception and continue on without collecting those content libraries. Arif also added a supports feature for warm migration of VMware VMs. So there was a PR to core to add that feature, and he set that feature as supported on VMware VMs. Next slide. And over to Tina.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning. We had 21 PRs merged this sprint. Ansible Runner support was added in the Ivanchuk release. For the last few sprints, Lucy's been working on cleaning up the AWX Tower-based code under the Ansible Runner solution. The work is almost finished with one more PR to be merged. Because not all calls to MIQ AE engine deliver require workspace to be returned, in Sprint 119, Lucy added new options to specify if the workspace should be returned. In this sprint, Lucy fixed an issue where the dynamic dialogue's deliver call was not returning the required workspace. Drew modified make retire requests method to use the base class name instead of class name to generate the retire request. Greg M adjusted the automate service model to accommodate the EMS cluster to cluster rename. Greg M removed the call to retire service resources from the retire service automate method. Before retirement as a request, the retire service resource method initiated retirement for any of the retirable service resources. This is no longer necessary with retirement as a request because it creates a retire task for each retirable service resource. Billy removed unused automate methods and spec tests. And finally, Billy's working on a project to refactor the old style automate methods and spec tests, making sure there's 100% test coverage. GP is helping with this ongoing effort. Next slide and over to Joe.
Thank you, Tina. So this sprint, 25 PRs were merged across the platform space. Starting with enhancements, Dan contributed one to the Linux admin's disk operation support by changing the way disk size information is collected. And he improved the way journal logging messages are generated by taking advantage of the systemd journal message method. Nick C enhanced the worker container environment to align with the way we reference database information in OpenShift. And he reverted a previous commit which had disabled workers from being run as containers in OpenShift. Some bugs were also included in this work he did, notably changing the worker method in MIQ workers class to return a count of 0 when the required role is missing in the specific worker type. Keenan contributed a couple of enhancements to improve Kappa U performance. Joe R continued the Ruby and Rails upgrade effort. and I made an enhancement to MIQ LDAP's SSSD conversion tool to support a fresh configuration for external auth without having to first configure any MIQ LDAP. And for bugs, Keenan fixed one where metrics capture was failing. Next slide, please. Slowly. There we go. Thank you. For technical debt, Nick L. removed the AWS SDK EC2 dependencies. Libor removed an unused variable from MIQ expression class. And Dan added the placeholder parent method get source and targets to the MIQ request workflow. On the continuous integration and testing front, Dan, Keenan, and Nick Al all contributed improvements to our test environments. Last slide, please. There we go. So this slide is a little off the usual model that I follow. I broke out most of the work that Nick C. had done for OpenShift codification because he did quite a bit this week as we move to revitalize this environment. So for this sprint, a summary of what he did was the monolithic container image will now be based on the UI worker pod. Nick also fixed the arguments in the build file for the base image, and he created a more flexible bash build script allowing the parameterization of the from image and the registry destination. He made a major improvement to better organize and simplify using the development environment by deduplicating internal and external database templates, creating a build template, simplifying the container scripts, and wrote it all up in a new README to reflect all these changes. And that's it for the platform space. Next slide, and on to Martin for the API, please.
Okay, on the API side, we had a few PRs by Dan Berger that were improvements to our specs, and we have a new functionality. We have the server grouped PR. Well, that's also by Dan Berger. That's all from my side. Next slide.
Okay, that concludes the Sprint 124 review. We'll get together in 2 weeks on the November 27th for Sprint 125 review. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.